So I'm here today in support of the name change of Stonewall Jackson. As I think that it's very important that the representation of our history is also there to be around our children so that they are not around traumatic names whenever they're growing up and learning.
One, Stonewall Jackson, which many would not consider a traitor, was a traitor. When you create an insurgency against the Union, you pretty much labeled yourself as a traitor.
Because if we don't start taking care of our own children, we don't have a future. And that means your children, my children, all of God's children. All of us, red and yellow, black and white, we're all precious in His sight.
It was a really hot afternoon, late afternoon. The strategy was that we would be out there in droves to welcome the board as they came into the building. But I was the second speaker on the roster to speak. So I went inside the building and waited my turn to speak. While everyone else was outside chanting, there were lots of delirious activities happening, flag snatching, song singing. I missed all of that while I was inside.
All right, now we're going to go on to our public hearing. The renaming of Stonewall Jackson Middle School.
From the cruel separation of families to the widespread slaughter of indigenous peoples, these men have caused so much pain and suffering. We seem to have forgotten what men like Jackson stood for.
I was a commissioned officer in the United States Army. I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. This is an oath that Stonewall Jackson took, but he violated that oath.
So I'm asking you all not to remain neutral. I'm asking y'all not to be those silent friends. Martin Luther King talked about the silence of his friends was louder than the shouts of his enemies. I left the building after my speech. Came around the corner and I saw people gathered around a car. They were listening to the meeting. We were all kind of talking about who we thought would be the holdout. And so we listened to all the other speakers speak.
And somebody had their car turned on, which had the radio station playing, and it wasn't a clear signal, but we were able to hear most of the other people talk, and then we were able to hear the discussion. And I don't think I can put into words how happy and proud, not just me, but everybody was when we heard, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 unanimous votes.
We've had a very close-knit neighborhood. The west side of Charleston at 7th Avenue was a very mixed neighborhood. Black and white lived there together.
Yeah, I grew up on the west side. I lived up behind the high school, walked to school every day. Went to Robbins Elementary, Lincoln Junior, and then Stonewall.
My mother graduated. She came to Charleston in 1956 in the middle of the academic year. And she tells the story of how they were called to the auditorium as black students. And they were told by a black administrator that you're going to have to start taking a bath and brushing your teeth and making sure that you comb your hair because now we are going to school with white kids. And she would tell how they laughed among themselves because they had come from good homes as well where they did all these things and nothing new. And they wondered whether or not the white kids had been called in to kind of do the same thing.
I had maybe three black children in my classroom in the first grade. And that was in 1956. And I remember my textbooks were still stamped in the front that said property of West Virginia Free White Public Schools.
I remember my grandmother bringing neighbors of all races to eat. You could go to Ernestine Walker's house and have beans and cornbread, and we weren't really raised to know that color mattered.
They had a skating party, birthday skating party, at a skating rink. It was called Barlow's. It had some other names, I think. The same woman owned it. She changed the name of it at some point. Biggest racist on the west side of Charleston. She had said that she would tear the place down before she let them in. So this birthday party incident, the whole class was invited. We had one black girl in the class, and I do remember her name, and she's still alive. So she showed up, and she wasn't allowed into the inn. She stood outside and looked through the window. And I think back about it that we had a segregated roller skating rink in front of the high school that to this day, people will post stories on Facebook about how much they loved that skating rink. And I always point out that, well, you only loved it if you're white because no black child ever roller skated at that roller skating rink.
It was an idea whose time has come. I tried unsuccessfully in 2015 to have the name changed, and it was met with hostility in some cases, but not as much support from the Black community or the white community. Several were outspoken in 2015 with the news media coverage of that petition then, and saying that there's no way that they would, change the name. It represented history, can't erase history. But their stance this time, they qualified, well, back then, this is where I was, and now this is where I am. I was just stunned. They one by one talked about how they understood Black pain. And this is an all-white school board.
Folks like myself and Dr. Ferguson who challenge these systems of white supremacy and the icons built to those icons, be they people or institutions or ideas, are made to feel as if we're not patriotic, that we don't love this country, and that we're not a part of what makes America the country that it is.
James Baldwin said to be a conscious Black man in America is to be in a constant state of rage. One of the things that is painful is to watch the murder of unarmed Black people by police.
That's why this moment in time may be different from other moments in times when America has an awakening or an enlightenment as to race issues and how those issues really impact all facets of our lives in this country. We're not just talking about discrimination and how African Americans and other people of color are treated differently in our society. And we're not just talking about hate and hate speech. We're talking about systemic and institutionalized racism.
There was a march led by Bishop Wayne Crozier from his church on the East End, about 3/4 of a mile to the Board of Education. It was a Saturday, there's nobody at the board, but it was just a community event to show solidarity and to support this move. And they had some people speak there.
A thorough education should certainly not glorify the Confederacy.
Amen.
It is time that this board vote unanimously to remove the name of Stonewall Jackson from a middle school that is not only tasked with educating our children, but also provides that education to a student population that is almost 50% African American.
The gray of our school colors, red and gray, comes directly from Jackson's Confederate uniform and his likeness, brandishing a sword, is the mascot of our school. Let that sink in.
Shameful.
I just felt like we honestly needed a change in the community because Stonewall was a racist and he was not a good person. And since the community is majority African American, that's offensive to our ancestors and our culture. It felt like our school was cheering on someone who had stolen people from their homes and like killed their families. He fought for that. He fought to keep that.
We're not trying to change history. We're just trying to move on and move forward and make a change in our lives. It's not right to have a name after a Confederate soldier who fought against our ancestors. We're trying to make a future for ourselves, our classmates, and future generations.
If Stonewall Jackson and his side, the side he believed in, the Confederates, had won the war, could Cam and I be friends? Would we be equals? Or would I be, quote unquote, superior because of my skin?
As people, we all need to care about each other and be a decent human.
There's a direct link between the history of slavery in America and the society in which we continue to live in 2020. And if I can say this, when you look at the murder of George Floyd and the blatant indifference that we witnessed as he took his last breath, it bears striking resemblance to murders of slaves and then following the Civil War, lynchings of African Americans all across the South. And if you cannot see that the similarities in those actions, then you are missing a teaching point.
But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for right.
I was in elementary school when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. I remember them showing his funeral in our elementary school. And to still go through a lot of some of those same issues that they were dealing with in the 60s, to still be dealing with that now, it really is painful. But there is a motivation on my part, and I think a lot of people's part, to make sure things are better for our children and our grandchildren.
I believe in social action, but I also have generations that are looking up to me right now to say, what do you have to say about this? So the respect and honor that I have for my daughter and my family bring me here first. When I think about my grandmother and her mother, the roots of where we come from make me show up today for tomorrow.
I will note on all these events, I brought my oldest daughter with me. She's 14 years old. And, you know, it was important to do this as a community, but on a personal level, it was important for me to do this to to show her and to teach her that this is the way to change things.
When we were standing by the car and I heard the unanimous vote, you know, personally, I'll be honest, it was vindication for me. I was like standing, I was alone in the wilderness crying out all these years, you know, and I was like, wow. But at the same time, I had so much hope for our future.